So immediately I jumped on it. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I got to check this out. I got to learn everything it can do. And then the more I dove in, the more I was like, okay, I need to slow my roll a little bit on this one because this is going to go so far and so deep. I could see right away this was going to, it was going to be another thing like the internet itself that completely changes the landscape of like everything.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a fun one and a technical one, I'm sure. Our returning guest is a virtual CFO and chief nerd at Nerd Enterprises, Seth David. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you, and always look forward to having conversations with people who completely understand and love technology. Mm-hmm. I always feel like it's part of our world, and I look forward to learning what's new with you. So maybe before we jump into all the good stuff, because some of our listeners may not have listened to your previous podcast, tell us a little bit about you, how you ended up doing what you're doing today.
Sure. The very quick version of a very long story is that in 2003, I started Nerd Enterprises as a DBA. And it really started before that while I was working at a CPA firm. And I couldn't stand working at that CPA firm. I hated my job. And it was really almost out of force of need. I started looking for ways to bring in like side hustle income long before the term side hustle was even a thing. And I did. I started posting ads on Craigslist and getting little clients here and there. I would sneak out of the office at lunch to go meet with a client and sneak back in. And I started building this thing. Eventually left the CPA firm to start Nerd Enterprises. That was, again, about 2003 with a heavy emphasis on the tech. In those days, tech was nothing like what it is now. There was barely an internet. The internet was still fairly young in 2003. But and social media didn't really take off until 2008. So between those periods of time, I built a bookkeeping practice using what technology was available, posting ads on Craigslist. I learned a little bit of HTML so I could post rich text ads to make them stand out. And I got a lot of calls from, all local businesses. And I built a nice little business, only me, just providing the services, going from place to place, visiting the clients in person, and toiled for hours in spreadsheets trying to figure out how much do I need to charge, how many clients do I need to get, so that little by little I weaned myself off of that CPA firm to the point where I eventually gave them notice. And I did that because I landed a client that needed me like 2 days a week or 3 days, something like that. And so I kind of, I liken it to, like Tarzan swinging from one vine to the next. I swung from the CPA vine to this, 3 day a week part-time marketing job while I picked up clients on the side. It just made it really easy for me to make that transition. And over time, I just really leaned on the tech. I was always a fan of it. I was, one of the things that, that I was focused on working at the CPA firm was I was the only one there that had really strong Excel skills. So any projects that were Excel heavy, they would put me on. And I used to even train the managing partner a little bit because he would call me in and ask for my help, how to do things with spreadsheets. So that was really the beginning of my experience tech. And like I said, I just bought HTML for dummies so I could learn a little HTML so I could post those rich text ads. So right away, plus I should mention, I had a computer science major initially, and then I left school and went back and got my accounting degree. So I have that mix in my educational background as well of computer science and accounting. So that all blended perfectly into what evolved into Nerd Enterprises. Then, as I said, 2008, you have the social media explosion. That's when Facebook and Twitter were getting started. And right away, I saw opportunities to leverage these platforms, but especially YouTube, where I was making videos, but I wasn't putting them on YouTube because I didn't think YouTube was meant for that kind of video. And then I had this marketing consultant who said, Seth, you got to put your videos on YouTube. And I said, I thought YouTube was just for like people posting videos burning Elmo dolls and stuff, because that was a thing at that time. It was like you would see a lot of those videos.
How terrible.
And they were horrible. Yeah, like how could you burn Elmo? That's awful. I think they thought it was funny that because Elmo would be laughing while he's on fire. But
yes.
Anyway,
well, not very funny.
Point being, I didn't think it was a business use case for YouTube. I thought it was for idiots burning Elmo doll. Anyway, so he said, no, you got to put it on there. It's, and it was early days, obviously. And I looked around and I saw that, the only other people posting anything about QuickBooks were like college professors. And they were so boring, droning on and on and on. And right away, the opportunity that I saw was I could make this exciting. I recognize that accounting and bookkeeping in most people's eyes can be a very dry topic. But if I sound excited about it, which means I need a real reason to be excited about it, then I can make it exciting for anybody who's watching a video. And that's kind of how it took off, and my videos took off and I built a following. And, to this day, YouTube is still, probably my number one source of leads, referrals, what have you. I do less now than I used to because I've got all kinds of programs established and lots of things. So my focus has shifted a little bit. But between you and me, although now it's not going to be between you and me anymore.
It's going to be between everybody.
It's going to be made public. It's no longer going to be a secret. But as of this year, 2024, I'm launching actually 2 new YouTube channels. One is going to be focused entirely on accounting and bookkeeping and like principles of accounting and bookkeeping. And then the other one is going to be for apps. This way I have a clear focus and it's very clear. If you want to learn accounting, you're going to go to this one YouTube channel. If you want to learn about the apps and the tech that I love, that's going to be on this other channel. Just to provide real clarity for people in terms of where to go for what.
Hey, very cool. Exciting.
Yeah. The theory is that YouTube will like that better. I feel like YouTube likes channels that have like a singular focus, where it's very clear this is what this channel is focused on.
I think so. I mean, it comes back to you want to help the viewer find what's best for them, right? And so if it's all over the place, that's confusing. Yeah, that's confusing for the viewer. So so you get to do your passions, and I think that's really cool and such an interesting trajectory. I mean, just thinking about it, 2003 when you said that, or did you say 2003 or 6?
2003 is when I started Nerd Enterprises as a DBA. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that long ago, but then, and it's not, but yet what's changed since 2003 is like feels like a couple lifetimes of stuff that's been going on. So lots of rapid change. Yeah,
I mean, when you think about it, 21 years ago, right?
It's 21 years ago, and like we back then, it was like you said, the internet was so in its infancy. Just got through the .com bust, and people were using emails, but faxes were still a thing, and it's not that long ago. And now we're starting to get into artificial intelligence, which is I'm sure going to be something we're going to be talking about here shortly.
Yeah,
we'll get back to the interview right after this word from our sponsor. If you're a small business owner, this is for you. Running a business is just plain hard. Endless to-do lists, employees to take care of, and your ever-present bottom line. So first of all, kudos to you for staying on top of it. Now I want to tell you about Gusto. Gusto built an easier and more affordable way to manage payroll, benefits, and more. They help over 300,000 businesses by taking the pain out of tasks like automated payroll, tax filing, direct deposits, health insurance administration, 401k, onboarding tools, you name it, Gusto makes it easy. And they really care about the small business owners that they work with. Their support team is attentive and helpful. And since money can be tight right now, you'll even get 3 months free. Just go to gusto.com/The Successful Bookkeeper and start setting up your business today. You'll see what I mean when I say easy. Again, that's 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/The Successful Bookkeeper. Thank you for hearing from our sponsor. Now let's get back to the interview. Very cool history. So now you've talked a little bit about where you're going and what you're going to be doing this year, why don't we just jump right into how AI has impacted you and changed what you're thinking and doing? Let's talk a little bit about that.
So sure. So, I mean, I've always been, what I think most people would describe as an early adopter. So I see something new like that, I pounce on it. When it came to AI, it was I want to say it was no different, but then it was a little different for me in that I realized right away this is something I need to get my hands wrapped around. In fact, immediately when it exploded, it was like December of was just last year. I think it was December of 2022 was when ChatGPT came out. Right around then, I'm losing
Around then,
time.
I think I was hearing about this chat thing, and that would have been kind of like probably earlier in the year, and I was like, it's a chat bot or something. People were talking about chat.
Yeah,
and
it launched in like November, December of 2022.
Yeah.
So it was basically around for all of 2023. But so immediately I jumped on it. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I got to check this out. I got to learn everything it can do. And then the more I dove in, the more I was like, okay, I need to slow my roll a little bit on this one because this is going to go so far and so deep. This is, I could see right away, this was going to, it was going to be another thing like the internet itself that completely changes the landscape of like everything, And I also know, because you can look back and see from just looking at the history of how as time has gone on, technology explodes much faster. The innovations are more extreme and much quicker than in the past. So I also know that what ChatGPT was when it first came out, I knew right away at this point, a year later, a little bit more, it's going to already be very different. And sure enough, it is. I mean, there's not just ChatGPT. You have all these big data companies competing neck and neck. Google's really trying to make a play, and they have a promising opportunity, I think, with BART and everything they're doing with their LLMs. And then, of course, you have Microsoft, what they're doing with Bing, which Microsoft has a big stake in OpenAI, which is who created ChatGPT. Most of us know the story, and you can Google the articles if you don't. But what I'm getting at is I didn't necessarily, first, right away, I wrote an article, and I started playing with it and started figuring out, what the use cases might look like for the accounting industry. I played around with having it like keep track of financial transactions where I was feeding it and saying, okay, I'm starting a business and I'm putting $5,000 in a bank account. And it did an okay job, but it needed a lot of correcting in order to get it right. Like I would ask it to produce a balance sheet in table of form, and, it's learning how to prompt it properly to get the results you want. And it's iterative. You're going to prompt it once and not get anything like what you expected. And that's how you learn, and you keep revising your prompts until you start getting closer and closer to the desired result. Bottom line, it was clear. It was clear what the potential is. It was also clear it's not there yet. Meanwhile, funny story. So I wrote an article about it right away, and I sort of pitched it to Firm of the Future, Intuit's blog, and they were like, "Yeah, no, not yet." And then, like, I want to say between 1 and 3 months later, they came back to me and they said, okay, yeah, we want an article about this now. Like, they finally saw what I was seeing. That's how quickly I had pounced on it. And so I wrote an updated blog for them. I don't know if they ever published it. Now that I think about it, I don't recall ever getting the notice that it had been published. I write very long form articles these days because I feel like that provides a lot of value. So anything I write typically is going to be 1,200 or more words.
Okay.
With a lot of thought and energy put into it. And I've gotten feedback to this effect that it's too long. They feel like readers won't, the attention spans are too short for it. And I'm sure they're not wrong, but it's just my style.
Well, I don't know. That's an interesting question. Recently, I was just looking at some long form content, and I was like, in the back of my head, I was like, this is great. This is a great article. It's actually going through all the stuff that I need to know about it, and not just surface level fluff. It's like, so I think there's a place for both, but not to go too off topic here. I'm sure you and I could go way off topic.
Sure,
but
all day,
all day long. But I appreciate the long content to say the least. Yes,
I feel like that's where the real value is. I can't tell you how many times I read articles on publications like Fortune or Inc., where you would expect the best quality. And it's sometimes I read an article on one of these platforms and I feel like it's very superficial stuff that I could have written with my eyes closed. And it's like, come on, like I expect more from these kinds of publications.
That's right.
So I try to do what I would like to see when I'm reading anyway. But I get it. You said it perfectly. There's a place for both. But anyway, so that was my early experience with ChatGPT. And the other thing is, by and large, what ChatGPT can do as a tool is it can write. It can write stuff. So it's great for marketing purposes. You can get it to help you write copy. And what I started to do, I thought about this because obviously I'm playing with it. And if you're familiar with how ChatGPT works, you're going to create different chat transcripts theoretically to ask it different questions. But then it occurred to me, and I even asked it once, like, can you see what I've discussed with you in other transcripts? And it confirms no. So I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just experiment. And I started a transcript and I called it Nerd's AI Assistant. And I use the one transcript and I start talking to it every day and feeding it information about my different programs. I have 97 and up. I have my email that I write that's called Nerds Words. And I started giving it examples of my writing and said, please learn how to write in my voice, and started playing with these kinds of things with ChatGPT. And I realized there was definitely a benefit to keeping it in one transcript that goes on and on so that it can learn more about me. Now, there's a caveat to this. And eventually I read the articles, so I learned this, that it's got a limited memory. So in one chat transcript, it's going to start to forget after, what they describe as like 10 pages worth of information. So the workaround for that is to periodically ask it to summarize everything that it knows about you so far in that transcript. So it kind of brings things forward and keeps its knowledge of everything fresh.
Right, fresh.
And honestly, I haven't found any real friction though in what I was trying to test by experimenting with it in this way. In other words, I haven't, the goal is to not have to, as time goes on and it learns more about me, it makes it easier to prompt it because it has all the feedback and context and background. So I don't find that I have to go back and sort of re-prompt it for old information so far.
Interesting.
So that's how I've played around with it.
Very interesting. I've not heard that specific use case before, and it's quite interesting when you think about it. If you had someone sitting right next to you and you were discussing the things that you were doing, they would know, oh, well, this is the way. It's like training a staff member, right? This is the way I do things. This is how I like it. These are my thoughts. It's like, oh, you would likely think this, so let's go with that. Very interesting. And so you have like a couple of different threads that you are, and when I say threads, what did you call them? They're the
transcript,
transcript. So you'll have a couple different ones to stay focused, or is it just one big one?
At this point, I've abandoned all the individual ones, and I really just use this one. Unless I have something really specific that I feel is totally off topic from, generally everything that I do. I really, in fact, I recently named my AI assistant Sandy. I happen to be thinking about a cousin of mine named Sandy at the moment, and I was at the same time trying to come up with a name. So I asked it, can I call you Sandy? And it said, sure, you can call me whatever you want. So it's funny. I even asked it, I said, as an AI, I don't suppose you really need validation, but this is great stuff. I said something along those lines. And actually it got back to me and confirmed, no, I don't need validation on an emotional level, but it helps me to know what you like and what you don't like so that it knows how to evolve more with me. So it is important to give it feedback and say, hey, I really like this. I don't like this. At one point, what I've started to do is one thing I want to make sure is very clear. I wouldn't dare have it write anything for me. What I have done is I'll write something. I'll write like a post for Facebook, let's say, and then I will copy and paste that post into my assistant's chat transcript. And I've already prompted it. When I give you one of these Facebook posts, I need you to write it, just clean it up basically, but make sure it retains my voice and drop some emojis in there for me. Because the one thing I don't want to waste time doing is trying to figure out what emojis to put in there, but I know they're effective creating the visuals, and it does a beautiful job of that. And when I first did it, I didn't like the outcome. So I pulled specific sentences out of it and I said, this is not something I would ever say, And so again, it's like you said it perfectly. It's like having somebody sitting right next to you and you're training them how to write for you, how to learn how to write in your voice. And the AI is really, really good at that.
Wow.
So a writing assistant is a great sort of use case to think of using it for,
When I started using it, I was like, it's the death of writer's block. There's just, no one can ever say, I had writer's block. It's like, ask your assistant for a little prompt. Like, I'm stuck. Help me out. Give me, give me a couple of ideas here. It's like, ba-boom, done.
Yeah. Yep. And I've used it to get ideas. And I mentioned I write a weekly email. A lot of times I'm a big fan of like quotes. I love quotes because they just summarize really important and, I'll just call it wisdom that I find really useful. And a little fun fact about me, I love the show Criminal Minds. I don't know if you've ever watched that show, but anybody who's watched that show will remember that at the beginning and the end of every episode, one of the cast will kind of narrate, and it's usually some famous quote from somebody from some book or somewhere, and it's always relevant to what that particular case was about. And I always love that because they in particular share these like really deep ones that that not the usual superficial stuff you'll see on the internet, let's say. So anyway, I like that, and I said I want to incorporate something like that into my email. So I asked ChatGPT. I said, give me 10 famous quotes from people that I can use. And then it became almost like a fun writing exercise where I would use that quote. And I also prompted it to give me like 10 fun facts about something, like random facts that were just fun or funny. And so some of the emails I've written over the past year were sparked by one of those fun facts or famous quotes. In other words, that became the thing that I used as the inspiration to write my whole email about. And so it just makes it fun for me. And like you said, it makes it really, really easy. You'll never have writer's block because you have this perfect partner and assistant who will never, be short on ideas or thoughts.
It's just one very narrow example of how this tool can boost productivity and really be an assistant to the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
I've always been a fan, or not always, but for a long years, probably a little bit longer than you started Nerd Enterprises, but a fan of Star Trek and Next Generation, and it was like the whole computer. It's crazy to see that today in my lifetime we're actually there with being able to ask this body of knowledge and say, ask a question and have it come back, and no, computer, give me something different or not quite. It's like, are you sure?
Right.
Just absolutely amazing. And we're just really at the beginning of it, like you said. But even in 1 year, there's people like you experimenting, testing with this raw tool that now, it's being put everywhere into every single app and thing that we use today. But where will it go? Where else do you see it helping you?
I think what we're going to start to see, and we're beginning to see it now, is we're going to see how the role that AI plays in everything we do is going to lead to a world where there's less hardware. That's really to sum it up. And case in point, I mentioned to you before we started recording that, for the holidays, my wife got me as a gift the Humane AI pin. And I think this is a perfect example. It is being pitched as something that will replace your smartphone. And if you haven't seen it, go onto YouTube. It's important. Don't just Google it. Go onto YouTube and search Humane AI pin, and they have a video that I'm sure you recognize right away when which video is theirs, because it'll be from the Humane AI YouTube channel. And you'll see what this thing can do. I'll talk about it a little bit because as soon as I saw it, I was blown away. And I sent it to my wife, who's not a tech person. She's the opposite of me. She takes notes with pen and paper, literally. And so we are on opposite ends of the spectrum. But even point being, it has credibility when she looks at something like this and says, "This is amazing." And she got it for me as a gift. They're not shipping yet. They took pre-orders during the holidays. They're going to start shipping March of 2024, and it's just first come, first serve. So meanwhile, I'm learning everything I can about what this thing can do. And you'll watch the video. They'll do a much better job than I can of explaining it. But essentially, it's a little pin I would put on my shirt somewhere maybe over here. And let's say I live in Burbank, California. Let's say I'm walking around downtown Burbank. I can say, hey, you know what? As I'm walking around Burbank here, do me a favor, shoot some B-roll for me. I want some video B-roll of downtown Burbank that I'm going to use in one of my YouTube videos or something. And it'll do it. It'll respond. It'll shoot video. They have obviously their own cloud server. The people who made this came from Apple. So, they have the background in this. They just broke away and formed this thing. And I actually, as of the day we're recording this, I was reading an article just this morning about how they've been intentionally very secretive about this for obvious reasons. They don't want other people jumping on this bandwagon and stealing their idea,
Yes.
But it's just amazing. It can project a little thing onto the palm of my hand, so I can say, I can have it show me something. I can tap it and talk to it and say, hey, do me a favor, remind me when I'm walking by the supermarket that I need to go get milk, and it will do that. I mean, you can do stuff like that now with your phone, but you get the point.
I totally get the point. It's like basically, if we look back to Star Trek. Early days, right? They had the communicator, little flip phone type of looking thing. And it's like beep, beep, beep. And then in Next Generation, it was more about what you're talking about, a little thing on your lapel or shirt where you're like tapping it.
Yeah.
And it reduced, like the tools in your hand were like other tools, not this. Our phone, very interestingly, if it becomes less that you actually need to actually have a phone, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
The tool would be something else.
It can't completely replace the phone yet, and I'll explain exactly why. I read an article.
Keyword
about this.
Yet,
right? Keyword yet. One of the big reasons it can't is it lacks an element of privacy. Meaning, if I'm in public, anything I want it to do, I have to speak out loud to it in order to do it. But that's not that much different than what people do now. I mean, how many times are you standing somewhere in public and somebody's having a conversation, even if they have earbuds in, you can hear their side of the conversation. And, I joke with my wife about this a lot, like that how many people so often you're out in public and they're having like the most inappropriate conversations to be having out loud in front of other people. So
right.
I imagine, I'm guessing again, I don't have it yet, so I don't know exactly how it works, but I imagine it will be Bluetooth compatible, so I can at least put earbuds in, so its responses would be private. But if I'm prompting it in public, there's no way of getting around the fact that people are going to hear what I'm
someone's hearing you. But like you say, it's very common. I mean, I rarely even type into my phone anymore. It's more, translation, voice to text.
Yeah.
Very similar concept. But obviously there will be a place for a tablet style device, but then it's
something that links up with it so I can
something,
type if I want the privacy that comes with not actually speaking out.
Big competitor to the Apple Watch, I would say.
Yeah.
You've got to have this watch, and it's like this is different. This is right up near your head, not like talking to your wrist.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And then from what they describe, it can play music, and they give you this visual of this like cloud that shows how it has technology that somehow creates this like sound cloud that envelops around your head. So again, I have to experience it firsthand to really understand it. But the impression I get that they're trying to give us is that, you would expect a small device like that playing music. The music would sound very tinny and not good, but they were trying to make it seem like it's going to sound like really good sounding, like the way my headset would sound listening to Spotify right now. So,
wow.
Everything.
Wow.
And of course I can use it. I can say, hey, call mom, and it'll call my mother, and I can talk to her while I'm walking around, and I can, shoot video. And then obviously there's an interface, that they have on their cloud where I can access that content and share it and whatever I need to do with it. So I can't wait to start playing with this thing. I'm dying to.
I bet. Well, it's very, very exciting, very, very interesting too. I'll be Googling it the minute we're off the.
But one more thing. So talking about
today.
the future, how would this impact the accounting industry? Here's my thought. Eventually, it's technology, this technology or something like it, it's just going to be connected to your POS system. It's going to automatically know how to record the transactions. And I can have a device like a pin like this, and I can say, hey, give me my balance sheet, or read me the highlights, analyze, summarize my balance sheet and tell me how I'm performing. In other words, the kinds of things that now we would take time running. And by the way, you can do this with ChatGPT. I can run a balance sheet and a P&L in QuickBooks Online, let's say. I can literally highlight all the text on my screen, copy and paste that into ChatGPT and say, here's the balance sheet. Don't answer yet. I'm going to give you the P&L. Do the same thing, give you the P&L, and then say, now I want you to analyze how this company is performing. And it'll do a beautiful job. So the same thing, but I won't need to go through even all that copying and pasting. It'll just have access to the data, and I'll press my button. I'll say, give me the update, real time. What's going on this week? How are my sales? I can probably program thresholds and say, look, if my inventory for these particular items hits this reorder point, I don't even have to tell it to remind me to place the order. I will tell it to place the order for me. and I'll tell it to shop around and find the vendor with the best pricing balanced with who can ship the fastest. You'll be able to let it use its own intelligence to figure out the most logical criteria for helping you run your business. All this stuff is going to be completely automated and free of any hardware. It's just going to be you talking to some AI device and telling it what you want. And then the device will do all the heavy lifting for you. And again, everything automatically coded in terms of the transactions themselves. It's going to be very different in probably the next 5 years, especially.
Wow. It's remarkable what's possible and where it's going and has already gone.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about, so we've talked about AI. I'm sure it'll weave back in, because how can it not be about everything we talk about going forward? Because it'll be in every app, it'll be around us, utilized, all that good stuff. But let's jump into a little bit about some of the apps that you use to run your business today and that you recommend to your clients to use. And starting off with, how do you things come out all the time. There's thousands of apps, different things going on. How do you even begin to evaluate whether an app is going to be effective or useful? Do you jump on everything? Do you have some criteria around it? I'd love to know that.
So it's an interesting question. And the answer is different now than it was, 5-10 years ago even. So the working backwards, now I don't jump on everything. I used to. And the big difference is I've had so many years now of looking at and evaluating different apps that I have less need of new apps, right? Because I have most of my problems solved. The question is, and here's comes the criteria for how I evaluate them. It has to meet a 3-question test. And it has to be a yes answer, one of these questions at least. The first question is, does it solve a problem I don't already have solved? Right? If it does, or even potentially, then yeah, I'm going to check it out. Right? The second question, does it solve one better? Right? I may have the problem solved, but this new app coming out might represent a better solution, a faster, more efficient way without sacrificing the quality of my work to get things done. And then the third one maybe is the most interesting is, I'll just generally put it under the heading of, is it like a fun toy to play with where I want to find use cases for it because I like working with it? And a good example of an app along those lines that I use very much now is an app called Bubble Up. It's a knowledge management tool. In theory, it could be used entirely for your knowledge management part of your business, for like a company wiki type of thing. I don't use it entirely that way. I use it as a supplement to the main tool that I use, which is no secret. I'm deeply, madly in love with Notion. In fact, Notion was an example of one that didn't solve a problem I already had solved, but I definitely saw the potential that it might solve one better. It solved one area that I didn't have solved anymore, because for years I kept notes in Evernote, and I grew to hate Evernote. I just found it over time, as I accumulated a lot of data in it, I found it very clunky. And at first, of course, I said, well, that's my fault. I got to organize it better. But even using getting things done methodology to organize the stuff, it was just terrible about how it organizes tags. And then I was reading about problems with the company many years ago when the whole management team was changing over. And so I was like, I'm out. I got to get out of this. I got to find something else. And for a while, I really didn't have a good sort of note-taking solution. Enter ClickUp. ClickUp was what I was using for project management for a long time. And it eventually introduced a documents area, which, funny enough, when I eventually took a look at Notion, I was like, hey, this looks very familiar. I feel like ClickUp literally stole a page out of Notion's book. But the thing about ClickUp's documents area was that it still didn't have good organization. And I was finding it hard to find, because with ClickUp, if you've ever used it, you could create a document at any different level. It could be at the task level, it could be at a folder level, a list level. It can live in a lot of different levels within ClickUp, and it's very hard to trace back and find it later on when I'm looking for it. So enter Notion. Notion solved a problem that I didn't already have solved as far as the sort of note-taking and knowledge management piece. I didn't expect it to replace the project management, or what I like to now call work management piece. But eventually I saw, as I learned more and more how to use Notion and how customizable it is, I saw the opportunity to do just that. And eventually I completely abandoned ClickUp and I went all in with Notion. So, but those are the 3 questions that I use as criteria for evaluating. And by the way, that points to where a lot of people, I think, get this backwards, because you'll hear all the buzz on social media about this app, and everybody's using ClickUp, and you got to use ClickUp. Meanwhile, so people will jump on the bandwagon and start using ClickUp, but they haven't really figured out what problem they're trying to solve by using ClickUp. They think that the app is going to be the system, and that's not how that works. and this is my message to people, is you have to have the system first. A system is something that can be described and defined completely devoid of any apps. It should be something you could do with pen and paper theoretically. When you have that system defined, like you understand a methodology like David Allen's Getting Things Done, that's the system. I can do that in a notebook if I want to. Once I understand that system, then I can pick any of these apps and work the app into the system so that the app gets molded around the system. And that's why I think a lot of people get frustrated and struggle and say, oh, these apps just don't work, because they're doing it backwards. They're picking the app first and they're thinking the app is going to be the system. And again, that's just not how that works.
So true. So true. I mean, every app can likely do similar things. And if you throw anything, if you throw a scrambled system at ClickUp or Notion or any of it, it's going to come back as a scrambled, unthought out process and not really a system. And so people jump from app to app. Oh, this is going to be the thing that's going to save me and help me get organized. And it's just not the case.
Yeah. And I'll throw this out there also. To help people, it helped me a lot sort of wrap my head around how to think about these apps and where they live. I read a book that's called Come Up for Air. The author's name is Nick Sonnenberg. And I don't love his choice of apps, but I do love his systems. And one of the first things he describes is what he calls the CPR framework. And the CPR framework is how you basically store the sort of genres or major categories of the different apps that you need in order to run your business. And CPR, which is cute because it's come up for air, as in like, I can't breathe, I'm drowning, and all these apps and stuff. But C for communication. So I have my communications apps. I have P for planning and work management. And he specifically uses the term work management and not project management because a lot of what we do is not a project. It's just one-off stuff. And it's, so this way work management is more all-encompassing. And it might sound like it's just semantics, but it really makes a difference in our mindset. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, we have resources, which would be your company wiki, where you'd have your things like your HR manual and things like that. And going back to communication, that's where you're going to define it for your organization. Are we choosing to use email? I think email is a terrible choice for communication. I hate it. I think it had its time and place. Now I think it is the most disorganized way of communicating with people. Yeah, but you're going to use Slack, or if you're a Microsoft house, you're going to use Teams, right? It's pretty much between those two. I've played with a lot of others. None of them work as well.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of that was the planning and work management. That's where I've used Notion. You're going to pick something like Asana or ClickUp, or I just talked to somebody recently who's actually still using Trello, and he says to very good effect, which is sort of the proof of what I said earlier, that the app is not necessarily that important. More importantly, you need to define your system, and that system will prescribe how you use that app, and then any of these apps will probably work really well.
And every system, depending on its complexity as well, right? What's interesting is we work with lots of different vendors, and so they all come with a different. Like one uses Notion, one uses Trello, ClickUp, right? So I've got my hands in all of them because I'm part of their ecosystem, and so they come to me with the system. They say, "This is how I want you to use this app." And they're very clear about it. That's a system. And so if I follow the system, and when I don't follow the system, guess what they do? They tell me to, hey, you didn't follow the system. And all of those apps work brilliantly to manage me and the system. And it's a joy to use all of them because I've been taught the system and I use the app to do it. And so initially, if we jump back when someone came and said, oh, you're going to use this other, it used to be this thing where people would say, oh, no, well, we use this in-house. And, you got to use this tool. No, it's like every company is going to use a different tool. So it's the ones that succeed are the ones that help others use their system. And so it's been very interesting in that I've not felt like behind or not able to work with these companies. It's actually produced great, but yet I've got like all these different work management, because I really love how you call it, these work management apps, because that's what we're doing. We're managing the work we got to do, right?
Yep.
I think project management is such a, there used to be that role, still is that role, but that was, the project manager, Microsoft project, people went to school and for years to figure out how to use the thing. And it was like, we're doing these big projects. We're building a hydro dam, and we need all these bits and bobs. And so that was pushed down to people who are just trying to manage work with software or a better tool. And so I love the context really does matter. It's like, I need a tool that helps me manage the work that I got to do.
Yeah. Yep. And I love Notion for that because of its flexibility. Now, the downside of that is there's quote unquote some assembly required, so, but the beauty of it is you can do that assembly once, like I've done, and then create templates. And that's how I formed a program that I launched last year, which was my Bulletproof Notion work management system. I took a few pages out of a few resources that I've leaned on over the years to put this concept together. And so, my idea was I'm doing most of that heavy lifting, that assembly for you. So out of the box, you can take this and use it the same way you might use ClickUp. But then I'm going to teach you. I've got the course. I'm going to teach you how to tweak this stuff and how to make it your own. Because that's where, again, that's what I love about it. So going back to evaluating apps, how flexible is it? Another test I didn't mention that's really important is what I call the barbershop test or the haircut test. And here's what that means, right? So let's say I'm using this work management tool and I go to get a haircut and I'm sitting and waiting. There's a little bit of a wait. Maybe I've got 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. I better be able to pull up my mobile device and pull up my work in my work management app and be just as effective here, sitting, waiting for a haircut, as I might be at my desktop, with the understanding that I'm working on a much smaller screen. So a well thought out mobile app for my work management tool is going to understand that I need access to all the same features, but they need to be sort of better, more neatly tucked away, yet still accessible and intuitive for how to find them. And Notion definitely passes that test. One of the reasons I abandoned ClickUp was it failed that test miserably in a key area. And I'll be specific, just so that if anybody from ClickUp happens to be hearing this, they don't think I'm just beating up on ClickUp. But they have a table view that I relied on very heavily. And the last time I checked, which was only maybe 6 months ago, that table view was still not available in the mobile app. So it failed my barbershop or haircut test. I couldn't access my most important view from the mobile device. It was just not there. So that's the other thing. I agree with you
completely with ClickUp. Yeah, it's not, you think about somebody in their typical day as they're at a desk, they're then going from somewhere to somewhere, especially in this, the digital economy where people are working from home. You're always likely on or doing something. Just like you said, you're having a haircut. The world's still moving. You may need to do something. Idea comes up. You might need to action something. So it's this fluid motion. I'm an Apple user, and they've done, the continuity, or I even forget what they call it. But I got my laptop open. I can run my laptop from my desktop and control my laptop and it on the phone. So this whole continuity of devices, ClickUp fails it miserably because what I do on the desktop is completely different on the app.
Yep,
and so that's another great one. Is I love the very simple thought is making sure that app, and ClickUp's been around for a while. So I think a lot of people go, apps change a lot. It's also how fast are companies able to adapt. I would guess that ClickUp's app has been like this for several years and nothing's been done about it. And so, which companies are getting it right out of the gate, keeping it simple, making it work, right? And then gradually improving over time. A good improvement is just improvement, but if it's broken today, don't expect it to be fixed anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah, or that brings up another good point. And another thing I love about Notion, and I promise you, I'm not like a partner of Notions. I just love the thing. But I have learned not to bother calling support with a lot of little buggy things that I notice, because what I've experienced is that they're aware of it. And in due time, anytime I find it starts acting buggy in some way, it gets fixed within like a week or two. All of a sudden, it goes back to the behavior I expect, in terms of the way it works. And so it's just like that's one that I call the sort of hamster wheel test. Like, is somebody at home back there grinding the gears and actually working on these things and rolling out the updates? Another app I was considering, which was a competitor to Notion, they actually reached out to me because they saw videos I did on Notion and said, hey, we'd love you to check out our app. First of all, one of the reasons that app really failed me pretty quickly was it was very clear right out the gate, and they admitted this to me, that they were developing mainly just for iOS. And I'm like, I'm out. I'm an Android guy. So it's great if for people are using iOS, but that's another thing. And generally speaking, I don't like getting behind an app, even if they said they only develop for Android and not for iOS. To me, you need to be platform agnostic as an app developer. You need to develop for both. So I literally couldn't use a lot of the features I would have wanted to that might have gotten me to consider them as a replacement for Notion. But what I'm getting at is that there needs to be sort of regular updates rolling out. There was another thing I looked at recently. It was a community product, that I was going to use, with every course that I have a Slack community now. I tried a bunch of different community apps. I ended up coming back to Slack because none of them measured up, especially when Slack rolled out some of their major updates in the past year, which was after Salesforce's acquisition of it. And by the way, notice I know these things. This is important to know. If you're going to get married to an app, you really should know what's going on behind the scenes too. It's important. It's going to impact you. But I was trying another community app that was integrated better into my website systems. And the benefit to me would be I don't have to deal with people who have one login for Slack, one login for my website. It's all cohesive. But it was so new and it was lacking in so many features. And I even scheduled a call with some of their product people. And I said, hey, can we talk about some stuff? And in that call, everything I brought up, they said, we're aware of it all. Clearly I wasn't the only one who had these issues. And they made it clear that they were aware of it and they were working on it. 6 weeks goes by, not a single update rolled out. And I think maybe another 6 weeks went by and still not any movement, but still some more emails saying, hey, we're working on this. And at that point, I'm just like, that's it. I'm done. Slack works. Everybody's familiar with Slack. People like Slack. And with these new changes, I really like Slack. It does some really cool things. One of the things, by the way, you talk about the specific little in the weeds kind of features that become really important that Slack has that none of these other apps have is I get a message from somebody. I don't have time to get into it now. And Slack has that remind me later feature, where I can click the little ellipsis and I can say, remind me later. And I can choose, it has a bunch of logical defaults, like 1 hour, 3 hours tomorrow, which defaults to 9 a.m. tomorrow, or custom where I can choose the exact time and day I want to be reminded. That feature alone was missing from Discord. It was missing from Mighty Networks and a bunch of others that I tried. And so for that reason alone, I was like, that's it. I'm done. We're going back to Slack and it's going to, so that goes back to your first question about apps and how I evaluate them at this point, because I've been doing this for so long and I've had so much experience with what works and what doesn't. And especially after an experience like I just described that I had with my communications apps, it's going to take a lot for anybody to convince me to even consider getting out of Slack again at this point, because I've run the experiment and found myself running back to Slack.
That's right. That's right. It's interesting, and that's the challenge that these companies have, and like you say, knowing the background, right? Salesforce, an expert in cloud computing, and has the resources and proven track record to buy something, improve it, and keep the wheel rolling. But if people aren't getting on really important bugs or feature requests over time, that's a sign. It's just they don't have the ability or the funding to be able to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you're the end user is the one that's being sacrificed.
Yeah. We're the beta testers, whether we know it or like it or not.
That's right. It's gone. Because things are so fast moving. I think that's the other thing in terms of software development is this. And Salesforce was one of the first to do it. They were on a monthly update. So, back in the day, this was early 2000s, going back again. You would have a yearly, maybe a couple years of a major software update. Where Salesforce, they back in that time frame, they wanted to release a new update every single month. Well, we're probably now at weekly, daily updates that they're pushing because of the rapid, like you said, technology changes. It only is going to change. The consistent is only going to change faster than it did yesterday. And so now we are the beta users. We're every user that's on the system. ClickUp, Salesforce, Slack, Notion. That we're beta testing. We're the ones finding the bugs. That's just the way that it is. They got to keep their costs low and keep up with the speed of change.
And whichever bugs are getting complained the loudest about are the ones they're going to prioritize, right?
That's right. That's
which
right.
may or may not be the best way to go, And then you have the people in the forums who just all they do is complain about things, so they don't get taken seriously.
That's right. So now we've talked a little bit about how you choose apps. Getting back to the accounting profession, we've talked about your work management's Notion. What are some of the apps that are your faves and that you can't live without?
So I love Notion, obviously. Keeper, I think, is great for monthly close. I don't get the opportunity to use it. I wish I did, but I think I mentioned to you before we went live that earlier last year, 2023, I sold off the accounting services arm of my business so I could focus 100% on the EDU side, the educational platform. So I don't get the opportunity to use it, but if I was to go back out there and start taking on bookkeeping clients again, I would definitely use Keeper. Keeper would replace a lot of the processes that I would now use Notion for, because it does a lot of all the monthly close related tasks. But anything that's outside of the monthly close, Keeper can do it. You can create tasks for other sort of outside things, but I don't think it works well for those things. So I would still probably use Notion for the rest. But Keeper definitely for the monthly close. If you happen to be serving e-commerce clients, there's no question in my mind that WebGility is the best tool out there for capturing, transactions through a multi-distribution channel system and handling all those different channels and all the different payment methods for each channel and giving you extreme flexibility to customize exactly how that data flows into QuickBooks Online. As far as I'm concerned, there's no better tool.
The name?
WebGility.
I've not heard that name before. WebGility.
I actually happen to have their cup right here, WebGility.
Okay, WebGility. Okay, and how long have they been around? This
a while.
Is the first time I've heard of them.
They were like the first e-commerce app that I was aware of to sort of hit the market. Before them, it was like you just had to manually enter the transactions from the sales channel, or hopefully, and in those days, you didn't have any good import tools. But for a while, what I was doing was using SaaSant, which is, by the way, and potentially as a bookkeeper or accountant, the day will come you need to do some kind of an import, even if just for cleanup jobs. You got to have SaaSant. That's like the best import-export tool out there. It's also the reason I switched to that years ago from Transaction Pro Importer, which got bought by Right Networks eventually. I had switched before that acquisition because SaaSant just handled the bulk deletion process much better. I'm sure this has changed. This was many years back, but with Transaction Pro in those days, if I wanted to bulk delete, I needed to actually learn a little bit of SQL to query the data to isolate what I wanted it to delete. It was like, I don't have time for this. I'm an accountant. I'm not a coder. I don't want to have to learn SQL, right? So SaaSant just handles it beautifully. The mapping process is gorgeous, and they do have a good desktop product, by the way. So SaaSant, definitely, everybody should have that in their tech stack, if that's what we're still calling it these days. WebGility for e-commerce, SaaSant for doing import-export of transactions and bulk deletion, that kind of thing. Another tool that a lot of us are getting hot on, they've been at the conferences this past year, is a tool called Digits. And Digits is a gorgeous interface. One of the things I like about it is the people who run this company are all from previous big data companies, like Twitter and Google and so on. So they really understand things from a different perspective than, say, somebody who's only experienced this specifically in the accounting field. And if you go to their website, you'll see right off the bat, it's a beautiful, gorgeous interface. The first time I looked at it, I thought, it's beautiful, but it doesn't seem to do much. Then I had another look more recently, and I had a guy from their company kind of give me a walkthrough, and there's a lot under the hood that's neatly tucked away that it's incredible. It's like the ultimate pivot table that you could ask for, which is able to extract data at every level of detail from your QuickBooks Online company. So you can really drill down and analyze data. And when you're analyzing data, let's face it, it has to look gorgeous. If you throw me a big spreadsheet that's all black and white and you haven't even taken time to shade in the total lines, I'm like, I have to look at it, so I will, but I really don't want to. But you look at Digits, you're like, oh my God, I want to it's a whole different reaction, and mindset. Like you're drawn in because it's so beautiful. And all you want to do now is learn every way that it offers you to query and pivot on the data so you can get at really useful information that will shape decisions you're going to make for your client or for your company, right? So Digits is a big one. I mentioned Bubble Up. I think every accountant should have that one in the toolbox. Like I said, for certain use cases, it's a very good, nice visual tool. where you can organize, like I said, it's knowledge management. The other thing it does that Notion still does terribly is the email forwarding thing. So I mentioned I hate email, which means that I need a process for the few emails that I do care about. I need a way to forward it somewhere that I can work with it well. And BubbleUp provides a really seamless way. You just forward it to an email address. It shows up in this emails area. And from there, you have a beautifully rendered PDF of that email with all the formatting in place. And so what I do, I was just doing it this morning, is I forward the emails into BubbleUp. Then I use Notion's web clipping tool, and I clip it from BubbleUp into Notion. And that's going to create a page in Notion with basically the link back to the PDF, because there's just no direct way that works for forwarding emails into Notion. So BubbleUp is a great one. What else? Oh, and another thing I love about BubbleUp is it has what's called a Discover More feature. So I can create a folder, and let's say I want to learn more about AI. All I do is paste a few links to articles about AI and turn on Discover More. And it's like having your own research team. It's going to pull in articles from all over the web on that same topic, and you can curate it.
Very interesting.
So I have a whole project that I'm building based on having a series of folders for very specific subsets within the AI world, where I have it gathering research for me. And little by little, I'm parsing through that research and reading these articles and curating the content and creating a database for it in Notion, of course. And so the BubbleUp and Notion, I find, work really well, complementing one another. So those are a few of the examples of things that I really absolutely love and that I'm focused on.
Very cool. You mentioned conferences. You were at some conferences in 2023.
None.
What were some highlighted? None.
I talked to all the people who have gone to them, so I'm aware that Digits I mentioned were at all the conferences. I only know that because all the people that I know who've been to the conference.
You talked to the people, right?
Yeah, they were at their booth, and a lot of people came back to me having heard about it from me and said, "Yeah, I saw the Digits at the booth, and it does look really amazing." So I haven't been to a conference since before the pandemic, actually.
Okay. Well, those are some cool apps. There's obviously you are a super user. You've been at this a long time. Some really cool ideas on how people can start to adopt these and use them in their businesses. Let's talk about 2024. What's on your horizon for 2024? You mentioned already that you're going all in on the education. What's your 2024 look like, and what do you recommend our listener to be thinking about in 2024?
So I think I really I'm encouraged by your reaction to my use of the term work management. I think we need to be thinking of things on a broader scale as far as that kind of thing goes and how we manage all of our work. I think, like I said, what we're going to see as far as AI's impact is less and less hardware. I really believe that's true. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen, but like I said also earlier, as time goes on, these things happen faster and faster. So I think sooner rather than later, we're going to see. What will really be interesting is when these humane AI pins start to ship, how that actually shapes, like early adopters like me and how quickly that rolls out to the less early adopters, right? Because we'll see if it really does look like something that can replace these mobile devices. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think we're going to see more and more changes in terms of where the technology is going and how it impacts how we as accountants work with our clients, right? Again, like I said before, it may be that you don't need to run a balance sheet and P&L and look at it the way you might do very formally now on a monthly or weekly basis or whatever it is with your clients. It may be more that you have an AI tool that analyzes it, writes up a summary. You look at that summary, maybe you drill in to confirm some details, and then ultimately you're going to use that summarized version of everything to review things with your client. Right. So I think we're going to see more of a movement towards that kind of stuff. It's, again, we've said for like 10 years, go advisory, start learning how to provide advisory services. And you're going to be forced into that because more and more the transactional nature of bookkeeping is going to become automatic. I was reading in a thread recently where, people were criticizing how the bank feeds and QuickBooks Online sometimes very inaccurately try to guess for you where something should be coded. And people were in there saying, this is why AI will never take our jobs. And it's such a mistake to think that way. It will absolutely take your job if you don't start learning how to use AI for yourself. It may not be ready to do that today, but I promise you that kind of technology is going to get better and better. The more that these like LLMs get access to, let's call it more accurate but huge databases of data, because that was the problem with ChatGPT initially. It started out smart. It got dumb because it started accumulating data from every possible source, including people who were feeding it garbage, right? So, Sam Altman admitted it got dumber with time. Now they have to work on that. They have to re-evolve it to teach it how to parse out what the garbage is versus what's the real, accurate, reliable, valuable data. That'll happen. So that's what I think we're looking at for 2024. As far as my own plans for Nerd Enterprises, more courses. I'm looking to really aggressively build my course library. I have my mentoring program called 97 and Up, where I mentor accountants and bookkeepers, and they come in and we do 2 live weekly calls. And we're starting off this year with a whole section on how to write SOPs. I think that's because that goes back to what we were talking about having those systems. When you learn how to write an SOP, that's how you define your system that, like I said, is devoid of the app. So a very heavy emphasis. And when I'm done with this section of our calls, I kind of designed this year's curriculum to function a lot like a course. So when we're done with the SOP section of the course, our members will have a library of SOPs that they can swipe and just tweak it to use it in their own practices however they need. I'm mixing into that demos from apps. Like I have somebody coming on tomorrow, actually, as of the day we're recording this, from Ignition, right? Because Ignition, when I start thinking about SOPs for accountants and bookkeepers, one of the first things I think about is client onboarding. And one of the first apps I think about in that realm is Ignition, right? Because Ignition is, you're going to start it with that SOP, and then of course people continue to use it for the ongoing client management. So I'm sort of interspersing app demos that are relevant to the SOPs that we're talking about. And then, of course, I've got a whole section planned out on AI and how we can better leverage AI, because I think most bookkeepers are either not using it at all because they think it's just not ready yet. And these are the exact same people that said the same thing about going to the cloud until they were forced into the cloud. So what I'm hoping to do is get more people to not make that mistake of ignoring it now. Now is the time to start getting ahead of it and understanding it. Even though you go into it knowing it may not be ready yet for a lot of things, it's getting ready. And if you don't get into it now and keep ahead of it, you're going to get left behind and then eventually forced into it with reluctance. And that's no state of mind to be learning any new skills in. Is to be doing it because you feel like you have to, not because you want to and because you're excited about it. So I hope this year to get people really excited about embracing the technology. I got paid probably the highest compliment I could possibly get paid by somebody in 97 Up the other day. She posted this in Slack. I'll paraphrase. She basically just said, I am the least tech person, but in the short time I've been in this program, I have gone from that to being not afraid of tech to being excited about learning how to use the technology to work better, faster, more efficient, everything that goes with it. So
nice. That's very cool. Very exciting. Seth, you've got such a wealth of knowledge and so passionate about the work that you do, which is refreshing. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned a heck of a lot. I know our listener is likely saying, yes, I've learned a lot as well. Maybe some are their heads spinning a little bit, but that's good because it should be. There's a lot going on in this industry, in the world, and lots of exciting opportunity that goes with that. So Seth, I want to thank you for being on the show and wish you well in 2024.
Thank you, Michael. Same to you.
Beautiful. And before I let you go, if people did want to learn more about you, connect with you, always like to make sure of course, we'll have it in the show notes, but just let people know where they can best go to get in touch with you and start learning more about the work you're doing.
Yeah, just go to www.nerdenterprises.com. And you honestly can't go 5 minutes on my site without getting a prompt to opt into our list. Please do it. I promise you, I'm not going to shove garbage down your throat. I send a well thought out weekly email that reflects my journey over the past week. I share things that inspired me, things that I learned. Last week, I sent an email out that was about the Fast and Furious movies, which you wouldn't think that has anything to do with what we do, but I took something away from watching those movies over the break for the holidays. And I talked about exactly how something I took away from that experience applies very specifically and definitely into our businesses. So I try to write a really well thought out email that kind of feels like it's a personal email from me to you. It's not the salesy, like, oh my God, look at all my programs crap. It's like I said, it's a plain text message from me to you based on my experience over the past week and what inspired me that week.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, again, Seth, thank you on behalf of our listener for your generosity and being on the show. And we'll look forward to chatting with you somewhere down the track.
Thanks, Michael.
And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.